Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're actually going to talk about a completely different topic, which doesn't have too much only about basically hypertrophy or strength-based training, but we're actually going to walk through basically how endurance impacts the way we actually get to build up our bodies and whether it is actually worthwhile, especially for ourselves in our early 20s to even do endurance, and if we do, like what kind of benefits we could actually have from that. So today we actually are going to go and walk through the screen, and we'll have just a basic look into and talk about like how that actually impacts what your decision is to train one or the other or both, and also like on a quite interesting side note, what would be the best time to actually train in terms of age-wise, like when actually makes the most sense to actually do that. I actually want to say that basically I did decide to put this into kind of two categories of people. One is that when you actually do think about it, one is that they generally one group does train only endurance, and by endurance I have to say I do mean actually doing, let's say, jogging or going on a treadmill or cycling. So that's the only form of exercise this group of people do. And then the second one would be basically the usual guy who actually goes to the gym, but also does do some endurance work at least like once or two times a week, even going on a treadmill for, let's say, half an hour. I would say that warm-ups are usually like good to do, but I wouldn't count them exactly as, let's say, an endurance based exercise. Like if you do warm-up for 5 to 10 minutes, that is going to do some benefit, but isn't going to uh, in necessarily have these positive or negative effects we'll mostly talk about today. Just basically one very important distinction in that. And I basically also had this idea of, and I think it's very relevant this discussion to actually bring this up, is to actually talk about this third group of people, which basically I would say that's does incorporate myself, and is that I basically did ditch completely the endurance training, and that was actually done already I think about 1.5 years ago, coming up to two now, where basically only focus was to actually go for hypertrophy. And it's actually quite interesting because you would think, and even I thought before, that this makes no sense. Like if you do have time, you should go for that. And I feel like a lot of young men uh, would have time to do both. We don't have usually like too many responsibilities as kids or spouse or like basically the kind of the family route, right? So we mostly do have time for both. But despite that, I think there are still some effects that need to be considered, and why, for example, I have myself basically decided to lump myself into this third group, which we have outlined, and what it actually does entail. So to actually talk about that, I want to first talk about how it actually impacts beginners and how you would like to approach that. For the beginners, we will now talk about mostly young men who actually do try to go to the gym or try to even decide like what is the actual best way to actually go ahead about doing endurance or strength-based training, coupled with hypertrophy, or all of them together. And just to say straight that especially in young age, the endurance training, or at least heavy focus on it, will have the largest negative impact on what you are trying to do. And there is actually like two ways to talk about it. One is that it actually takes away the time. I do say, and I think it's quite important to highlight that basically weightlifting or any kind of strength-based training like doesn't have just have to be with weights or let's say doing curls at the gym. It can be any type of weight exercise. Well, if you do quite a lot of cardio, let's say, that takes time away from actually doing the lifts or focus on some other stuff as well. What I mean by time, I think it's like when you actually compare the cardio itself against weightlifting, I actually don't think there's that much time differential. I mean, let's say weightlifting, it has been shown, and the best case is that you finish your session around 60 to 75 minutes. I would say like push it maximally to 1 hour 30. And in terms of cardio, I would usually say that it's like 60 minutes to 120 minutes of cardio that is like done on average. So I wouldn't really say there's like too much time difference in that regard. But there is one huge distinction is that in order to actually have some progress, and especially as young men, to actually pack on size, which is I would definitely say one of the biggest things you would be looking for, and not to pack in size in fat but in muscle. That is actually really important distinction to make. So cardio basically takes away time from that. If you then try to do both, that's basically double the time or even slightly more. If cardio takes 2 hours in your schedule, then it basically takes double the time to do those activities. And like in some cases you might not be actually able to fit that into your actual schedule. I think like one of the activities is really fine, especially if you are young, but having both very tense for many people, it just isn't possible to do. Second thing is that is quite a bit important to distinguish is that when actually doing cardio, it does have like huge effects on improving your oxygen flow like through your blood and into your muscles. In the end, it over time lowers your heart resting rate, which is quite amazing. You basically do get calmer quite a bit, so that actually does help tremendously at work and even in gym itself. But actually quite a huge benefits. If I would compare that to weightlifting, I would say they are still smaller, like much smaller than what you would actually get from weightlifting, especially when being young. Which is kind of a distinction I made already a couple of times in this video, is that the benefits of weightlifting and hypertrophy training are the best you can actually do at this point. And the thing is that endurance training also one like takes away um, quite a bit of energy from your body. So then in the end, it forces you to eat more if you actually want to pack on size. So if you do both the endurance training and weightlifting, you just have to eat more. So that's kind of, let's say, a bit more time needed to put into that. So perhaps like get even one more meal into your schedule, which for some people, like for myself, I would imagine it would be quite hard to get to that. I think it's doable and like over time wouldn't be that hard, but it's just like one more thing you have to think of, I would presume. And the second thing is that the endurance training does impact your metabolism in a positive way, which then means that again you get to burn even more calories. So there is a kind of double hit or on that, which is had been called in science quite a lot. That isn't the best case to hear that phrase because that means that it's double impact. So in this case, it's also true that you have basically multiple ways which improve your metabolism and you burn more calories by just doing the endurance training itself. So there is two impacts that actually happen on that. So you basically do have to eat quite a bit more to even get back on size. One thing needs to be outlined, I think, which we haven't discussed before, is that like why even gaining size is important for men. Well, the thing is that fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, like gaining size does bring you more respect, even it's associated with higher uh, earnings potential as well, which could be just taken in terms of wages, but just basically a lot of people were able to get quite a lot of deals on business wise just because they were actually were able to back on size. Like I think it's quite there are actually quite a bit of stories where just because someone was basically small, they didn't get to have some kind of thing, you know. Uh, so this would basically be a thing that's actually really important to focus on, especially as being young. Now, the thing I did outline that basically what I would be actually looking for in terms of the best case for endurance is that it works really well if you are actually able to change your schedule around it. And I mean schedule in terms of everything, types of workouts or just your exercise bouts. If you're able to completely change your schedule around that, then it works really wonderfully well. I think that the best time to do that is especially when you are older. And I would say that when are you are actually in your 30s, so let's say about like 30 to 35, and in basically your 30s, the best case scenario will be that by the time you actually have built up your body from your early 20s up to early 30s, which you were trying to achieve. And at that point, in your 30s, you're actually able to focus more on this endurance type of training, which would enhance quite a bit, like in general, all your health, let's say metrics to say. Now, there's one quite important distinction is because we could just make the number up, right? So we could just say that it will be 30s because you had a lot of time to actually work on your size in your 20s. But the thing is that for men, the age at which our our basically body density and our bones get the largest is, and on average, so we could think that it could be like give or take half a year, but it's usually more into the 30s range, is that it's at age of 30. So that's the kind of the age at which we are actually able to maintain or even grow up to our basically biggest size, which is why it's actually much easier to maintain our body size into our 30s as well, since we were actually able to hit that peak. So this is quite a bit important because that basically means, excuse me, is that we are actually able to much more easily maintain the size into the 30s, because we already built up on that, and maintaining is much easier than actually gaining it. When we did discuss this thing about actually trying to do endurance in your 30s, if you haven't actually put the work in your 20s, I think that has to be delayed. So even though our kind of peak in terms of body size or kind of bone densities on average at being 30 years old, still the uh, kind of the work that you put into your workouts in terms of weightlifting still outweighs that peak. So you can think of it is that if you didn't work on yourself in your 20s, you would basically push that window, let's say 5 or 10 years later as well. Then in terms of what actually would be the great regime to have, if you did follow and you are able to follow the strategy or path where you're actually working on yourself in terms of your hypertrophy trainings, weightlifting, and size in your 20s into your 30s, is that you can basically do something called a 3-2 split. So this would basically mean that you would be doing 3 days of hypertrophy or strength training. You can actually incorporate like both of those, depending on your preference as well, and basically depending also on your goals, because both of those are quite a bit different, even though they can encompass the same exercises. Just the structure is quite a bit different in terms of the reps or sets. But it's coming back to this 3-2 regime. You'll basically have these three weightlifting days, two now cardio-based days. So before we talk about actually having zero, and then actually two rest days. I mean the typical kind of structure for weightlifting at the moment, I would say, is that there's quite a lot of like 6 days a week for workouts, 1 day rest day, or even training every other day, which would basically be 4 days of workouts and 3 days of rest, or even like some small exercises in between on that. But that would be like the most typical. So here we'll basically have a lot less hypertrophy days. And I would say in this 3-2 model, there would still be quite a bit of muscle gain. Like you wouldn't just maintain, but you would still be able to actually pack on muscle, very much depending on what type of exercise you do, of course, because that is actually really taken. You can't grow your arms if you're only training your legs, of course. But it has to be said that this 3-2 would still benefit quite a bit. If you would be only looking to maintain, so I think this is actually probably the best case scenario that you actually did this correctly, in that you did train your 20s quite a bit and were actually able to pack on size. So then you will be able to shift more your focus into other activities, so this endurance-based training and also work, for example, which is also quite a bit important. So you'll be able to basically get into this 2-3-2 regime, which will basically switch one day from weightlifting into one day of endurance at the time. What is quite amazing is that I did mention work and basically this endurance focus in your 30s. Like this would help you even further with the work that you are doing, by basically able to bring up more oxygen in your body. And the second thing is being more calm, as we did also say earlier in the video as well. So those will be kind of the main things that will be actually able to put you up, but it doesn't matter that much if you didn't or weren't able to get to start on your fitness journey at 20s, since you can basically still get amazing benefits in your 40s, which is an amazing age. Like, especially for men, it's not even old, and I wouldn't even say that it's some kind of age. It's like, let's say a middle, so that would be actually quite amazing to at least have the 440s where we're actually able to both have the size and actually have the endurance training benefits as well. Hopefully this was quite a bit helpful for you and actually brought quite a lot of insights into what you could incorporate and how to actually, like, I think we saw in the first video we did talking about talking about the strategy of going into 30s and 40s. So we can actually do more of that in the future, because I think those are quite a bit important to not just look at the years at the moment. Like, I think most, if not majority of us, don't even think about maybe, let's say, the next 5 years in that detail. But I think it's important to actually look into how we could actually approach that with the hindsight of what actually we could then later train in our 30s and 40s. So thank you so much. There will be even more videos and of course sessions that we'll actually have. So really enjoying our actually talks, especially in the past few weeks. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.